Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of Scotland's Towns Partnership webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about the Scotland Loves Local campaign. So thanks for coming along and engaging with us. We've got quite a short agenda. We are just going to be getting a bit of an update from myself. I'm Phil Prentice, the Chief Officer of Scotland's Towns Partnership. We also look after Scotland's improvement districts, and we've been working closely with the Scottish Government, as you all know, initially through the BIDS Resilience Fund, now through the Towns and BIDS Resilience and Recovery Fund. There will be a further tranche of funding coming soon, and I'll just give you a wee bit of a strategic update on terms of Scotland Loves Local and what we're trying to achieve. Obviously, the pandemic has created major disruption across all of society, and in particular our town centres, city centres, high streets. It's been very difficult. Now we're starting to see a relaxation of some of the lockdown, and our town centres are beginning to open again, albeit very differently and very cautiously and safely, and that's a message that we would continue to underpin. We don't want to risk a second spike, so all of this has to be done cautiously, but it can still be done ambitiously. And I think the Love Local campaign, fundamentally what we're trying to do is change people's behaviours. We've all had to adapt. We all now are, a big proportion of us all are now working from home, or remotely, or agilely, that we no longer travel long distances for meetings into city centres, etc. So we've been able to reconnect, first of all, with our neighbours, with our local community and our green spaces, and now we're able to reconnect with our local businesses. And we want this relationship to continue because these businesses have helped us through the pandemic. You know, the grocery shops have been open long hours, the local farmers have been supplying, we're building resilience into the local supply chain. So we want to reward people for changing their behaviour, recognising what these businesses have done during a very difficult time, and to continue that behaviour moving forward, because it will be a substantial amount of time before we do go back to that normality. Love Local was launched a couple of weeks ago. We are going to continue this campaign through to Christmas. Obviously, we've got the brand, we've got the web platform, lovelocal.scot. We've also got the current STV television campaign that will drive wider awareness. We've got major relationships across NewsQuest and the Herald, Evening Times, Press and Journal, DC Thompson. So we're going to give Scotland wide coverage. And today is really just about telling you guys how you can engage with this. How can we encourage Scotland's citizens to do something to aid with the recovery? And the key message here is, if we support our local economies, every pound that's spent in the local economy flips around 6 or 7 times. Every pound that you spend on Amazon disappears out of Scotland, never to be seen again. If we spend our money in the local economy, for example, the hairdresser, now that you can get your hair cut, that money would then go to employ a trainee hairdresser who then leaves the shop and spends her wages in the local economy. The local grocery store gets supplied by the local farmer. Again, that money gets spent in the local economy, and it just churns around, and everybody wants to try and help through the pandemic. The easiest way for Scotland's citizens to help is to spend some of your money in your local economy. So how do you engage with this programme? Because the Scottish Government have really lifted this. They're getting excited by it. They want to underpin the campaign and support it the whole way through. A return to localism, which is more sustainable. It deals with climate emergency, it creates resilience, it creates local community, and it creates a faster recovery as opposed to spending your money on Amazon. So we have the experts in the team. So we're going to hear from Gareth Brown, who has been running the programme for us. Gareth works for Message Matters, and we contract Message Matters to do all our PR, lobbying, comms, and media. And we're going to hear from Giles Etherington as well, who's the founder of Brand Satellite. Giles is the smart guy that's come up with the imagery, and both of these guys are going to talk to you today about how best to deploy the Love Local brand in your local economy to try and just embed this behaviour shift and to reward people for walking, for cycling, and for supporting their local economy. To give you a feeler, whilst it's still not finally agreed, we are exploring the options of a local currency platform to support Love Local. local reward cards, local loyalty cards. And again, the only place that you'd be able to redeem those would be in your local economy. So it totally locks in expenditure.
Okay, and then I'll let you do your
Okay.
webinar. And then after that, I'll check that before you send, okay?
Sorry, we're getting a wee bit of feedback here. So if we move on to the next slide to tell you how you can actually engage through the webinar. Probably the best feature is to actually ask your questions using the chat box. So we're familiar on how to use Zoom now. You can raise your hand to ask a question throughout, and we'd also ask you to try and share this using social media just to let people know what's happening. We will be recording this and it will go up onto the web platform as a digital asset. So if you've got colleagues who wanted to be here but couldn't make it, please feel free to forward this on to them. Without further ado though, I'm going to hand you over to the experts who'll be able to take most of the detailed questions. So Gareth, can you please give people an idea how they can engage with Scotland Loves Local?
Thanks, Phil, and good morning, everyone. Firstly, apologies, my internet connection seems to be a bit shaky this morning, so hopefully you can hear me just fine. Alison's kindly agreed to share my slides for me, just to try and reduce the sort of bandwidth. But what I'm going to do just is I'm just going to go on to just going to start off really with some background. So Alison, if you want to just move on there. So what I'll cover, because the really important stuff comes from Giles, for the purposes of this webinar, what I'm going to cover is a wee bit of background. And we're going to talk about the aims and the strategy behind the campaign, so everybody can really sort of internalize what it is we're trying to achieve very specifically. We'll look at some of the key messages, and I suppose we'll look at how we think you can get involved, and obviously we're happy to answer any questions or hear any ideas as well. So yeah, Alison. So as Phil pointed out, Scotland's Towns Partnership's been engaging with the Scottish Government on this work for months now. Phil talked about some of the funds, and throughout some of those conversations it became clear to us and Phil that we needed to turn our attention to what was going to happen when we would emerge from the crisis, as it were, and into the recovery mode, and what Scotland's Towns Partnership, what its role would be in that. So we pitched the idea of a national campaign to the Scottish Government, which had a very, very simple message, and that was that given that consumer spending in local areas was going to be absolutely pivotal to Scotland's economic recovery, let's pitch a campaign that focuses solely on trying to encourage Scots to think local first. It's worth saying that this was taking place in the backdrop of, I suppose, 10 years of challenges for the high streets as well. So it was important to remember the pre-COVID context as well as the post-COVID context. Okay, Alison. So the key behind any national communications campaign of this nature is behaviour change. And it's a very simple question. How do we want people to feel when they engage with the campaign? And what do we want them to do as a result? How do we want them to change their behaviour? Now, in this case, we've gone for a very specific type of behaviour change, which is trying to get people to think local. So it's not just as simple as saying, oh, go and shop in your local grocers, go and do this, go and do that. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create a sort of a switch, flick a switch in people's minds that starts to try and make their default setting that whenever they need a piece of garden furniture or a microwave, or they want to go out for a meal, that automatically they will think local first. So it's trying to achieve something bigger than just saying, remember to shop in your local bakery or your fishmongers. So we put together a national marketing and public relations campaign, and the message is dead simple. It's a very simple message, and the kind of goal of the campaign really, campaigns are very different in their shapes and sizes. The very simple goal of this is to reach as many people in Scotland as possible. It's a really simple aim. As many people as we possibly can through as many channels as we can. And the strategy behind the campaign is not trying to make an economic case for shopping local, because the truth that we have to confront ourselves with is that for many people, purchasing something on Amazon might be cheaper than shopping locally. It may not be, but it might be. They might also be able to get a wider selection of things online than they may be able to in their local town centre. So it doesn't make sense for us to try and engage people in a very transactional type of discussion. What we want to do is create an emotional trigger, which says to people that our town centres aren't just a selection of buildings and pavements and streets. Fundamentally, they're made up of people. And the people who occupy our town centres, the local businesses, the other sort of social spaces, they are our brothers and sisters and our neighbours and our friends and family. So we're trying to trigger this sense of loyalty and compassion and solidarity and actual nostalgia, try and trigger good memories people have of growing up and shopping and being around their local high streets, to try and make this connection. And I suppose it is trying to take some of the community spirit that we've seen during COVID and continuing that on. So in terms of, I suppose, some of the channels that we've deployed so far, so we have arrangements in place with TV. You may have seen some of the television ads already. We have marketing arrangements with NewsQuest and DC Thompson, who own the likes of the Herald and the Press and Journal, the Courier, but also lots and lots of locals. And actually our priority in this campaign is not the big national papers. It's the Greenock Telegraph. It's all of the Inverness Courier. It's all of those hyper local channels, and they aren't just print packages. In fact, quite the opposite. There's a major emphasis on digital and social in this campaign. So the vast majority of our time and resource has gone on developing very targeted digital advertisements, targeting people through Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and other things like that. I suppose the final sort of the aim of this is trying to create a campaign that all of you and many others can get involved with, because that's the way that you really increase the reach of a campaign, is through other people advocating its aims on your behalf. And Giles will talk a wee bit about how we've tried to do that with some of the branding. Okay, Alison? I'm not going to read these. I'm just going to leave it up. But these sort of this is what we call the main campaign narrative, or the main messages. Now, they can be broken down again into like 2 or 3 bullet points, but I thought you might be interested just to see the sort of language that we've used. You'll see that we've had to be very careful to balance the very important public health guidelines as well, because the last thing that we would want to do is do anything that would distract from what the Scottish Government is saying around the fact that we still need to remain vigilant and be careful. Okay, Alison? There's lots of ways you can get involved the main thing we're going to talk about today is how you can get involved in the digital side of things, and through some of the creative assets. But I suppose what I would mainly draw your attention to is the branding toolkit and the campaign pack that we've put together. This pack will evolve as the campaign evolves, because although we've spent a lot of time getting a lot of the initial creative imagery together, you know, as the campaign grows and evolves, we'll need to add to that and change it. But it's really thinking about what channels you've got available to you locally. So whether it's your local paper, you know, trying to get them behind the campaign on a local level, whether it's taking some of our assets and branding them into your own with your own photographs, or whether it's just, you know, using the hashtag Scotland Loves Local and really trying to generate your own content and get as much out there as possible. So as I say, the important bit of today's session is Giles really, he'll talk you through how we've come to the brand and ways that you can use it in a way that's consistent with the campaign on a national level. And yeah, I think that's me for now, Alison.
That's great, Gareth. Thanks a lot. I think the key message there was down at the bottom of the second last slide, that Scotland is made up of small businesses, and these guys take risks every day. They are the lifeblood of the Scottish economy, and now they need you. They need you to recognise that and to support. So again, you know, consider all of the messages that we've given you today and look at how you can ramp up this campaign, because we're dealing with major corporates who are going to lift it, major agencies who are going to push for it. If collectively we all work together, why these Love Local schemes have maybe failed in the past is that they've just lacked the national scale. You know, someone's tried it in a small area and it hasn't really gathered enough scale. The fact that we're getting so many of the government agencies, the government itself, corporates across the country to back this campaign, you need to do the same thing. And together we can actually get a faster recovery by thinking local first. So in terms of how to deploy the campaign and make use of all of the assets, I'm going to hand you over to Giles now, who can talk you through the detail of that.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'll just share my screen with you. Right. I'd just like to carry on from where Phil left off. I'm a small business, so I know exactly how a lot of the businesses in the high street are feeling. And coronavirus has had a huge impact on many of us. This slide is just to show the inspiration behind the logo. Obviously, what I wanted to do is get the heart symbol in there, and also use the location icons to get people to love here, basically. So I don't know how I move this forward in this.
You're best to just scroll down, or yeah.
There we go. So yeah, the main icon is the two location symbols. The colours pretty much dictated themselves, being a nationwide Scotland campaign. Then we added the Loves Local. What we did here is we wanted to use like a handwritten font to make it feel like this is a ground up campaign rather than someone dictating it from up above. So that's why we've used the handwritten font, and the two L's also mirror the icon, the location icon shapes. And then by adding the ring around it, well, again here what we just want to do is just freshen it up and to bring it all together into one logo, because it sometimes can be very difficult to get icons and words to feel like they're all one element. So that's what we got to it. And as I say, the brighter blue just freshens it up and makes it more consumer friendly. The main thing about the branding is just basically to get it out there. On the last Monday when the campaign launched, I printed off a whole bunch of logos, and I walked down my local town in Melrose in the Scottish borders and went from shop to shop, explained that there's a national campaign launching. The enthusiasm was incredible, and within 3 hours of me doing that, over 50% of the shops in Melrose had them proudly displayed in their front windows. So the shops want this very clearly. There was that with a couple of the people, there was that sort of skepticism about another shop local campaign. But when explained that it was a national campaign, they felt much more encouraged about it. So I suggest that everyone just prints off the logo and goes and sees all their local high street shop owners, because they will appreciate it. So next, I'm just going to very quickly go through the branding guidelines. What I've done here is I've tried to keep them as simple as possible, because the most important thing is the logo gets everywhere. And if I start creating lots of different restrictions and instructions of how to use it, then that's going to limit it. So as I say, I've kept the branding guidelines as simple as possible. When you download them, you'll see that there's a small introduction and the reasoning behind why consistent branding is so important. I won't read it out now, but once you've got the guidelines in front of you, it's just there to explain the importance of consistency. Then the guidelines go on to talk about some of the technical terms used within the guidelines, just because I have no idea what level of anyone's design experience is, so that it's just there to explain some of the technical stuff. And then we get into it. The logo, as I say, is very simple. It shouldn't be messed around with. It's the proportions, the colors, and everything should be fixed and shouldn't be altered in any way. The logo is available in many different file formats, so it works for print, it works for online and social media. There's also the social media icons, so that the two location icons on their own, or with the round All of Scotland Loves Local. These can be used. It would be lovely if everyone turned their social media icons to these while the campaign's on, just to get the whole campaign out there as much as possible. Next is the color palette. I've put it in here both for CMYK for print purposes, and then RGB and hex, which are the online and web colors. There's a little tip about how you can change things in Word and PowerPoint if you're doing anything with that. Next is the fonts. We've used this font called Candy Chicks, as explained earlier, as the handwritten font to give it that ground up feel to everything. This again is available in the branding toolkit, and there's just a few explanations there of how to use it if it goes onto a couple of lines, but it's all fairly simple to use. The other fonts we've used are Open Sans, which will be used for text in any messages, and then Open Sans semi-bold for end lines or for using on the web address if you're adding that to any communications. Both of these again can be downloaded from the toolkit, or they're available on Google Fonts. As well as the logo, the important part of this campaign is using people and using local people. We've shot quite a few local shop owners, so we've got a portfolio of images already there. But what we encourage you to do is to take your own images. we're lucky here because every shop owner has their own studio, which is their shop, and pretty much everyone has a smartphone. So with a bit of staging and nice light, we can get everyone to be creating new images for this. One of the tips I would say that when you do this is don't go in close and get too close to somebody. So we don't know it's in a shop, and B, we're not seeing any of the social distancing cues that are important at this moment when we all go local shopping, to make sure that we're all following the guidelines there. I've also included within the branding guidelines the elements of the heart and the heart-shaped background. So these can be added. Yes, you'll need an element of design skills here. I'm hoping that you within your organization, or you have suppliers that can take advantage of these. But the heart obviously goes around the hero of the shot, and then the blue panel is used in the background, so you can add the text on top of it, and it's easily readable. Also within the branding guidelines is a Facebook post template. So this is layered. So if it's put into a software like Photoshop or any of the photo editing software, you can just take out the picture of the lady, put in your own picture, you can type your own words in the headline, and then it's good and ready to go straight into social media. And that's me. If you've got any questions, I'll hand you back over to Phil.
Thanks, Giles. That was really helpful. I suppose the starting point of this was love. You know, the two scales of human emotion run from fear through to love. And I think everybody's been very fearful for the last 4 months. You know, it has just been so disruptive across every part of our lives. So we're now moving to be a wee bit more ambitious, and we wanted to bring that message of love, about optimism, about, you know, love your local economy, love your local neighborhood, love your local community, and just start building on that. Because we have seen people's behavior shift, and, you know, we had drifted to become probably almost slightly Americanized and very singular and material. It has given us an opportunity to reconnect with neighbors and to look after vulnerable. And I think we just want to continue to build on that. We're now going to enter into Q&A. Ewan's going to be picking out some of the key questions. So over to Ewan, and hopefully Ewan can direct the questions to the right person, whether it's myself or Giles or Gareth. But for the next 5 or 10 minutes, we'll be able to take some questions from you.
Thank you very much, Phil. And hello, everybody. Good morning. So the first questions, we've had lots of good questions and comments in the chat box, so I'd invite everyone to check that out. And please do ask any additional questions you may have for Gareth or Giles there. I'll just begin for Gareth particularly, because we've been having some questions on the messaging, which I thought would be good to relay. So one that's come up a few times, and so I'm just going to kind of summarize, because we've had several questions on the same point, is how best to align Scotland Loves Local messaging to a local campaign, particularly if local groups have already designed or been in the process of designing their own Love Local campaign, and they may have some materials already. Any thoughts around just how best they could align and use the Scotland Loves Local materials and messages, but in a way that maybe aligns with what they've already got, and just takes best advantage of that?
Yeah, thanks, Ewan, and thanks everybody for your feedback and questions. I've noticed there's quite a lot. There is quite a lot of questions on this area. I suppose the first thing to say is we were given the timescales for pulling together this campaign were very, very tight. And the resources that we have to use are very, very tight. So in an ideal world, if we had lots of budget and lots of time, we could have photographed and filmed in 20 or 30 towns across Scotland. The reality of pulling together a national campaign is we need some base creative, and I suppose that's why we had to start with a national brand, the Scotland Loves Local. I suppose what we had envisaged happening is that what local towns would do is take the brand and use the logo, but start to create their own content. And that's why we came up with the term Scotland Loves Local, because in theory it applies to every town in Scotland, and it's meant to be a catch-all brand, a catch-all campaign. So I suppose the best way you can probably link in with the campaign is you don't need to sit, I'm not suggesting for a moment that you necessarily use creative that's been taken in Paisley and use it in, in Brewery. For example, I fully understand that you need to use messaging and images that reflects your own town, but I suppose that's why Giles has created the logos that you can simply just stick onto your images, which shows that your local campaign is affiliated or is in partnership with the wider national campaign. So, for example, you might create an image and have the Scotland Loves Local logo on the bottom of it, but the images and the text might be your own, and what you think that your town needs to reflect. I suppose the good reason for having a national brand is it creates a much louder impact across the country. Whereas if we'd broken it down into town-based brands, they become so local that the overall impact of the wider campaign is quite diluted. So that's why we've kind of gone for this overarching brand that we would then hope you guys would be able to take and kind of make your own, through your own images and creative content, but also through the posts. So if you're, there's nothing incompatible with using some of the Scotland Loves Local brand, using the text and the copy of your social media and your digital media to talk about your own place. So I suppose that's a bit of an overview, but happy to take any more specific questions.
Yes, and please do share any additional questions or thoughts that you may have on this point in the chat box. So another one, I think for you, Gareth, if I may, particularly as you're on. So I know you didn't have time to go through all of the messaging on your slide when you got to it. One question we have therefore is, a lot of the messaging looks to be very COVID related, and of course in the context. However, someone asked, are we including more that triggers the nostalgia and the emotion that you mentioned? So just to say a little bit more about what we're saying on those messages.
Yeah, so I suppose the balance of messaging on COVID and public health was something we had to consider very carefully. We just simply couldn't have a situation where, given the potential national impact that this campaign might have, and I don't know, the media coverage, I've been working in PR for 10 years and I've never seen a campaign with as much media coverage in a single week as this one. So you're talking about really, really serious coverage across the country, and we couldn't risk at all people being confused about what they are and aren't allowed to do in terms of the public health guidelines. So we've had to be quite cautious, in fact, overly cautious, and maybe too cautious. But I suppose from a strategy point of view, I would rather be too cautious and make sure people are still completely clear about what they're supposed to be doing from a public health point of view, because this is first and foremost a public health crisis, and it's important that we recognize that. On the wider nostalgia point, we're hoping this campaign runs to Christmas. So everything you've seen so far is really just in the first month. In fact, we're not even a month in, we're like 2 weeks in.
Mhm.
So we have planned to take different parts of the narrative and do different things with it. So for example, I would love to do something that talks about, you know, in my town centre at home, one of the things I really remember is meeting my local friends in the local pub who I've maybe not seen for a couple of months because we all have our own different lives. So, you know, we would love to do something about how town centres are nostalgic for experiences throughout your life. We'd love to do a bit more with the people, you know, behind the small businesses. So our plan is to take that narrative and over the next couple of months, try to make each of the different parts of it come alive with new and better creative. Because we can't just simply stick the same images and the same creative out for 6 months and not refresh it and not change it and not make it different, because then it becomes boring and people don't engage with it. So I suppose, yeah, we're taking a sort of phased approach to the messaging, and we're starting, and everything you'll see now is very basic, starting with the basics, and then we hope to roll it out and develop more nuanced and more nostalgic and more emotional messaging after that.
Thanks very much, Gareth. And I think that final point that you just made, I'm not sure that, there we go, sorry. I'm not sure, just on that final point you made, I think that's very relevant to a couple of the other questions we had, which were on, for example, is the role of home businesses being celebrated as well as part of the campaign, which are an important part of town centre life and economies, and I would say they absolutely are. And also we had another question about the role of city centres and with perhaps more complex mixes of businesses, and are they celebrated as part of the campaign, and what can be done differently there. And I think what you said about the fact that we've had the broad national launch, but different components of the campaign can develop or take account of different circumstances as we go forward. Would you say that's a fair comment to make on that as well?
Yeah, and what I would say as well is we're open to ideas. So if you have an idea of something you'd like to do locally, and you want to kind of discuss how you think it can fit in, or if there's any help we can provide, just get in touch. That's what we're here for. So, you know, you'll be able to get my details to the guys at FTP. So, yeah.
Thank you, Gareth. I wanted to bring Giles in, if I may. So I have a more specific question on the technical side, Giles, from Wendy Richardson, which is, what is the easiest software or app to download to use the toolkit for creating Scotland Loves Local with our own images? So, I mean, I think you referenced Photoshop with the layered Facebook image, and that some graphic or editing skills might be needed for editing some of the images with the Scotland Loves Local materials or content in our online pack. So it's just if you could say anything else about software that might be useful to use for editing and tailoring these images.
Okay, I'd just like to quickly, before answering that one, go back to the question about the branding and existing town branding. We don't see this as replacing that. We see this as working complementary to existing town branding, and I think it will help that whole message that not only when you're in your own town are you thinking local, but when you go somewhere else, everyone within the country is thinking local. So it's a good message, and it also helps those towns that don't have their own individual town branding, so they can use the elements that we've got. Regarding software, I mentioned Photoshop for editing the Facebook. There are other ones. I think there's one called Pixel, which is another free editing software, a photo editing software. And when it comes to using the design elements, there's a free version of Canva. Canva, where you can upload the elements and start playing around with images. And there's another one that works quite well called Lucid Press, Lucid Press. That has a free version, but there's also a more advanced version, which is about £10 a month, I think. I think they're probably the best ones that I would recommend for free or cheap stuff.
That's really useful, Giles. Thank you. And being not a graphic designer myself, a few of the programs you've mentioned I've used as well, and I find to be very user friendly. So hopefully people will find that useful. Okay, Phil, may I pass on to you the question about, and if Gareth or Giles want to jump in as well, that's fine. We've just had a couple of questions about aligning with, or how Scotland Loves Local can also align with the domestic tourism message that we're getting from Visit Scotland, which is a Hametown Tourist, and how those two messages could align as you see it, and do those two messages align. So Phil, may I just quickly get your feedback on that?
No, it's a logical point. Whenever we were designing the creative and coming up with the campaign concept, we done this in consultation with Visit Scotland. We knew that Visit Scotland sit on our board, so we worked very closely together. We knew they were about to do the big staycation campaign, and obviously that's again at a national level. But the logic there is that when people arrive on their staycation, that they engage with the hyper-local Scotland Loves Local campaign. So we're doing this in close partnership with Visit Scotland and Scottish Government. So this is all about Scots reconnecting with Scotland. I've been out and about a wee bit more recently, and I'm really encouraged just to see the efforts that some of our tourist towns have taken to comply with COVID, but to also just to give people that wee bit of sense of hope and ambition and optimism. I went to the seafood cabin in Skipness the first day it was opened, and I have to say it was a very, very safe and enjoyable experience with all of the COVID infrastructure in place. You could book before you turned up, you know, all of these things to comply. And you know what? The big bowl of mussels were absolutely delicious. So this is all being done in close cooperation with Visit Scotland. Scots, reconnect with your country, reconnect with the beauty of what Scotland has to offer, whether it's a city experience or whether it's the borders of the Highlands or the islands. Do it safely, and when you arrive, engage with the Love Local campaign.
Thanks very much. If I may come back to you, Phil, because we had just one general question, if you want to just briefly address on loyalty cards. Now, I know what you mentioned about local currency schemes is something very much in the ideas phase, but given some towns have loyalty card schemes and such in place, there was one question in particular, you know, how those might link or interact. Is this the same thing? So maybe just a general answer on that, so people have an idea.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's going back to the same point that Gareth and Giles both made. You can tweak what you've already got to the national campaign. Why these smaller schemes have struggled to have real impact is just scale. You know, they're maybe just too small, and the proliferation of brands all across the country dilutes it all. Now you've got one big national brand with everybody behind it. Use that to tweak locally. But the final point I would like to make, we are in discussions with Scottish Government about creating a national platform to support this type of activity. And we're working with MyConnects, our digital partner, who already do the reward cards, the loyalty cards, the gift cards. So we are talking about supporting Scotland Loves Local with a national platform that would allow local rewards, local loyalty, and local currency. For example, you could reward key essential staff, you know, NHS workers, people that have been going the extra mile. And again, the only place that they can redeem that gift would be within the Scotland Loves Local family. So, yep, all of this is being discussed. And if you already have, you know, the likes of Perth already has a loyalty card, hook onto our branding, because people will begin to see that this is about a national population shifting behaviour. and we just have to think local first.
Thank you, Phil. And another question I think that may apply to several places, towns in Scotland. We have someone from Bishop Briggs, which I think is essentially asking, how can Scotland Loves Local play into wider town centre regeneration and revitalisation, and also encouraging people to use their town centre more broadly, because they posted, the person who wrote the question said that they posted the Scotland Loves Local video on the Better Briggs Facebook page, and some comments that came back were, well, we'd like to shop local, but there aren't kind of any decent shops left, is the quote, which is to say that there are some empty units and maybe not as many independent shops as elsewhere. So it's more just a question in terms of your view on, well, as I said at the beginning, how can Scotland Loves Local help play into that wider strategy of town centre regeneration? What more can be done to encourage this?
Yeah. I'll take that one. I mean, we would be foolish just to continue looking at very operational stuff. I mean, the government have been fantastic in terms of their response to support businesses, whether it's through the macroeconomic interventions like job retention and deferral of taxation and VAT, etc., etc. But it's still, you know, and they've also put out 3 million directly through STP to support the resilience phase for bids. The bids industry really stepped up to the plate. This was an opportunity to showcase the value of having local collaboration, because at the end of the day, the only people who know their local communities are the local businesses and the local people and stakeholders themselves. So we moved into the Towns and Bids Recovery and Resilience Fund, which is a further 2 million that is being issued currently. All of that is very operational here now, dealing with the pandemic, but we knew that towns and city centres were changing dramatically anyway. So we've taken an opportunity to undertake a national review. So again, for any of our participants today or people who hook into the recording, there is a call for evidence out just now for the review of our town's policy. So we're asking people to go to the lovelocal.scot web platform and to look at the town's review. This is a strategic review of how we repurpose, reinvent, re-energize our town centres. So yes, I do take the point from the question. Our towns and city centres were struggling. A lot of them had become very cloned in nature. So it will take time. I mean, we've had 60 years of decline in our town centres. It's not going to be fixed overnight, and with COVID, it's going to make it even more challenging. But that challenge also presents an opportunity. Hence, we want people to submit their thinking, their ideas about what the future high street, the future town centre could look like. And the sorts of things that are being explored are the health and well-being agenda, looking at better green space, reduction of retail footprint, because we do engage retail very differently, you know, edge of town convenience, online platforms. But the uniqueness within a town centre can be that hyper-local, high-quality, niche, boutique-type retail experience that's linked to a wider place-based strategy that delivers evening economy, leisure, whatever else that's required. So green space, health and well-being, digital, repurpose and reinvention, repopulation of our high streets, all of these things are being discussed in the wider review. But, you know, again, I take the caller's point regarding the high streets. They were already facing strain and challenge, but I would challenge anybody to go to their high street and they will find stuff that they didn't expect. And that's the truth. You will go in and you will find shops that you didn't even realize were there. So if you can do it safely and you can do it confidently, you know, go in and have a look at your high street and try your best in the short term, knowing that in the longer term, the government has now got a focus on our towns and our high streets, and we will collectively start to repair and develop a better position in the future.
Thank you very much again, Phil, for that response. I wanted just to see whether Gareth and Giles, having listened to the discussion on these previous points, if you had anything else you wanted to add, particularly around any of the questions you've heard, but particularly, I suppose, on the points, again, regarding the alignment of Scotland Loves Local as a national message to what you are doing in your town. And even if you don't have your own sort of local campaign, local branding yet, how you can be thinking to make the most of this and to see Scotland Loves Local as an opportunity to boost kind of behavioural change and people valuing what's on their doorstep as much as possible.
Yeah, I'll just come in on that one, Ewan, and I'll probably just echo something that Giles said earlier, is that we're not that precious about the brand at all. What we want to see is, we want to see it used. You know, I know a lot of organisations are already doing their Love Local campaigns. So I guess my advice or plea would be just tie in with this the best way you can. We're not insisting that you have to do anything or insisting that you have to use our absolute. That's not the point of this at all. But we needed to create a national brand to run a national campaign. And Giles, having worked with Giles for a few years, he'll know as well as I do. You could be trying to come up with different brands for these sorts of things all day, but this is the one that we've arrived at after a lot of work, and we're really pleased with it. And so I suppose it's really just doing the best you can. The Scotland Loves Local hashtag is probably the easiest way from a digital media point of view, and some of the logos or icons are quite small, so even if you can't use the logo or you don't want to use the logo because you've got your own logo for your own town centre campaign, maybe think about changing some of the colours to match with some of the wider national campaign, or the fonts, or some of the icons, or even just simply to say in some of the copy that you're working with the national campaign. But, you know, at its heart, this is a local campaign, but one that needs a national overarching brand. So, yeah.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Gareth. And Giles, any final thoughts and observations? No obligation either, but just in case there was anything you wanted to add before I hand it back to Phil for his final thoughts.
Yeah, a couple of things. Firstly, I think what COVID and lockdown has done to us has made us feel much more community focused anyway, because we've had to all chip in together and help each other out. But the thing about having a national campaign is that we don't just live locally. So if, for example, I'm going up to Aberfeldy at the weekend, and there may be an Aberfeldy, love Aberfeldy local, but if this logo gets used everywhere, you'll be thinking local wherever you are, and you'll be reminded to be think local, because it'll be a logo that has, if what we want to happen we'll have an awareness everywhere within Scotland. So it's not just me thinking local in my town, it's me thinking local when I go to travel somewhere else. And also when tourists are visiting an area, if they're being encouraged to think local in this town when they're here, but then they're going to another town, if they see the same branding everywhere, they'll get used to that message of thinking locally.
Thank you very much, Giles. So Phil, if I can hand back to you for any final thoughts on this campaign and the wider work around it. And as I do, there's just one final question that's come in from Callum, which is about how online retailers such as Amazon can in some way be brought on board or partnerships established, so it's not just a case of one or the other, but some form of partnerships with local business, presence on the high street, sharing good fortune through grants or funding, encouraging local employment, etc. Is anything around this possible, desirable as you see it as well?
Yeah. Very briefly on Callum's point, we have been in dialogue with Amazon around their marketplace, because believe it or not, 50% of Amazon's revenue comes through the person in the bedroom that hooks into the Amazon platform to get to the wider market, and Amazon obviously takes a commission on that. How do we capture that in the concept of a sort of a town platform, even if it is just a local Amazonia for Bishop Briggs, for example. There could be 100 Amazon marketplace traders in that area, and we could possibly use this campaign to tweak that so people sitting in Bishop Briggs could go on to the platform, and it could be tagged by postcode that just brings up all the retailers within a sort of specific postcode area to give them a local option. So discussions have already taken place with Amazon, but we've also used the BIDS Resilience Fund. A lot of the bids have been fantastic at this. St Andrews, for example, created the St Andrews Virtual Marketplace. So there's now the ability for retailers across St Andrews to be onboarded onto a virtual town centre. Again, that's something that gives local people another option. But yep, the conversations are underway, and I'm not against Amazon. You know, fundamentally, I use Amazon myself, but the message that we're trying to get here is every pound spent in the Scottish economy will rebound and respin and help our recovery a lot faster. And it's also keeping your neighbours in employment, etc. So it's the emotional connection that we're trying to make. In terms of summing up, it's just for wider awareness. The Towns and Bids Resilience and Recovery Fund has now closed for applications. The final set of recommendations are with Scottish Government for approval. And I'm pleased to say that 188 towns will be receiving Scottish Government funding, which can help with this type of campaign. So hopefully over the next week or so, or next few days, you'll receive a notification. I would point out that the fund was 90% oversubscribed, you know, so there will be some disappointment in all of that, but we've done our best using a lot of judgment and support from Scottish Government and the team to work out which projects probably merited the funding most, and the awards have been made on that basis. So, I'd like to thank both Gareth and Giles today for their expert overview. I think it's been really helpful. The way Gareth explained it is we're trying to be as flexible as possible. We recognise that some people have already gone with the Love Local campaign, but use the national campaign to blend into that where possible. In summary then, basically this campaign is a call for all of the citizens of Scotland to support the Scottish recovery. This is a call for citizens to change their behaviour, to think local first, to realise that by putting that extra money into the local economy, that our recovery will be much more resilient and it'll be faster. So this is your chance as a citizen to do something to mitigate the COVID-19 crisis. So please engage with the Scotland Loves Local campaign. Try to amplify that as much as possible. Gareth pointed out, this has been phenomenal. The response to this has been phenomenal because everybody has been wanting something positive to align to. This is the moment where we can actually change people's behaviour that benefits everybody, and Scotland becomes a better place. We think local, we support our local economies, we become more sustainable, the climate emergency gets mitigated, people start to think about health and well-being, about continuing to support the vulnerable within their communities. All of this is part of Scotland Loves Local. So share the assets that are on the Scotland Loves Local, the lovelocal.scot website. Use the hashtag. The more amplification we get, the better. Society will not go back to what it was before COVID. You know, you've already heard the government, the public sector, Siemens, Google, RBS. The office market will not be going back anytime soon. You have a captive audience now. If you are the placemaker, the bid manager, the town centre manager, you now have got a captive audience that you can engage with. Use this campaign to engage with them and try to embed as much of this long-term moving forward. So with that, Scotland Loves Local. Thanks for your attendance today. Stay safe and well.